Afternoon, everybody who's joined. I think we'll get started here. This is going to be the first of a 2-week stint of perfSONAR talks. The first one here, Andy is going to be walking through a little bit about the features of perfSONAR 5.1. And next week, we're going to be having more of an open office hours like we did earlier this year, where people can bring in their perfSONAR questions and get some help from the developers. So I will turn it over to Andy right now to walk through some of the features of perfSONAR 5.1.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So hi, everybody. I think I know a lot of you just looking at the participant list, but if you don't know me, I'm Andy Lake from ESnet. I'm one of the developers on the perfSONAR project. So as Jason said, I'll be talking about our newest release, perfSONAR 5.1, which is currently in beta, so you can test it out. I'll be talking about how you can kind of get the beta. I'll be talking about some of the features, hopefully providing a little bit more context too, and actually demoing some of the features. I know we've done release notes and things like that, but hopefully maybe give you a little bit better feel by walking through some of those. And then at the end too, we should have time for questions. So obviously hit me up with those. And I'll probably look ahead a little bit to beyond 5.1 as well if we have some time. So I'm gonna do things in a little bit of a funky order, but there's some method to my madness. So I'm gonna actually jump right into how you get the perfSONAR 5.1 beta. So we've sent this out on the mailing list. If you look at kind of our release notes on our website, or there's a section even on our docs.perfsonar.net for getting these, but there's the QR code that's up on the screen if you want to capture that to get those instructions. So basically to install the beta, it's if you've installed perfSONAR before, it should be pretty familiar. But basically, one thing I wanted to highlight is we have this new script that I find really helpful for installing it. Mark Veit, who's on the call, gets most of the credit for putting it together. But if you've ever installed perfSONAR before, you've got to basically point at a couple package repos and install the package you want, which isn't too bad, but this script is actually just a one-shot thing. You can literally copy and paste what's here. It'll detect the OS, set up the repos just like you normally would by hand, and install the package. And there's this repo staging option that'll grab you the 5.1 beta instead of our current production version. So the reason I'm kind of starting off with this is I'm going to kick off an install here and let it run in the background while I talk through some other stuff, so we can poke around at a couple things on this box. So I'm literally just sorry, I guess the last thing I copied was the Zoom number. So let me recopy that command and go back here, and we'll copy paste that. Oh, and I'll sudo. There we go. And so we'll let this run in the background. We don't need to watch that go for a few minutes, but it'll set everything up and we'll be good to go. And so let me go back to the slideshow here. So now that I've started you off in installing something, maybe I can tell you what you'd be installing if you're following along at home. So probably most of you know what perfSONAR is, but we often get new people. So just to kind of recap here. So perfSONAR is an open source software collaboration. So ESnet, Jayant, Indiana University, Internet2, RMP, and the University of Michigan are the main collaborators. Over the years, that has become more of a mouthful listing all of those, but that's a good thing. So basically what that means is those organizations have dedicated developers that work on the project. So there's always kind of that baseline of support and development going on in the project, which is great. Of course, it's open source, so anybody's welcome to make contributions, and we get lots of good contributions from outside folks as well. And so that perfSONAR's been around for almost 20 years at this point, so that model's kind of served us pretty well so far, and I think a big reason why it's had kind of the staying power that it has. So basically what we're developing in terms of actual software is our goal is to essentially provide network measurements between different organizations. And so by network measurements, that can be a lot of different things. We support a lot of different types of plugins and things like that. But I think the most common measurements that people associate with perfSONAR are throughput, packet loss, one-way latency, and traceroute. So basically you install the software, you can run these regular throughput tests or packet loss loss test. We'll provide the storage and some visualization and things like that. And then, you have the ability to access those results and have those regular results and all that. There's an architecture diagram on this slide. I'm not going to go through that. It's just more to put that there to highlight that perfSONAR is not one monolithic piece of software. It's actually a bunch of stuff that we bundle together. It's a combination of things kind of that we take off the shelf, right? The developers don't necessarily maintain them. Things like OpenSearch and Logstash and Grafana, stuff we'll be talking about more today, are not things we develop. It's other open source components we pull in, and then there's things like the psconfig and pscusr components that are shown here that we do indeed develop that code base. So perfSONAR 5.0, that was the previous release that came out last year. I just wanted to do a brief recap of that because that was a pretty big milestone in perfSONAR's history. And it's basically laying the foundation for this perfSONAR 5.1 release. So if you don't remember, kind of the big change there was we ripped out the back end where we store the measurements. It was a custom thing we had to maintain for a while called ESnet. Replaced that with something called OpenSearch, which is one of the off-the-shelf components that I mentioned, which we think will kind of set us up better to do some more interesting visualization and analysis things kind of going forward. So you'll see there's a screenshot here of like a Grafana dashboard. I'll talk a little bit more about Grafana later. But the idea was we have a cookbook that when 5.0 came out that we published where you could like do a bunch of manual steps and build like this Grafana dashboard if you were interested in doing that. The reason I highlight that is because now in perfSONAR 5.1, instead of focusing on that back end like we did in 5.0, now that that's in place, we've kind of moved to the front end. And kind of the most visible feature is we've built this new interface that's based on Grafana. So when you install do a DNF install perfSONAR toolkit or apt install perfSONAR toolkit, and then you go to the address in your browser, you'll automatically get this kind of new Grafana interface, which I'll be going through. The other thing that's kind of big this release is this will be the first release of perfSONAR that supports what's called multi-threaded iPerf. Again, I'll go into this a little bit more in terms of what that means, but the TLDR is this will allow you to use iPerf 3 to test at rates above 100 gigabits per second. The former version basically had some limitations. It couldn't use CPU cores the way it needed to get that level of throughput. So that's a pretty meaningful change. Another thing too, I mentioned the psconfig component. So that's the component that configures tests for you. We've completely rewritten that. Previously was in Perl. It's now in Python. The good news for those of you that already have deployments, don't have to change anything. Honestly, it should be completely transparent to you. Like if you have a psconfig file, there's literally 0 changes to that format. So it's really kind of just a back-end change. Made a few tweaks to some of the CLI tools just to make them a little bit cleaner, but even most of those are the same. So a pretty big change from the developer's perspective, but hopefully not so much for you guys, and mostly just sets us up better going forward. The other big thing that we've added, and again, I'll show this more, is better instrumentation and troubleshooting tools. So basically, when you have problems with your perfSONAR installation, we've added some stuff that I think will be pretty helpful. I know actually some of this stuff has been my favorite in terms of the new features because it's already kind of been paying dividends, helping people figure out what's going on with their boxes. So pretty excited about that. And I'll show that some more. And then another big thing to highlight is the new OS support. We've kind of been lagging behind in a couple areas and keeping up with the OSs. So this 5.1 will be the first one where we have Debian 11, Debian 12, and Ubuntu 22 support. So no caveats there. Toolkit, archives, everything should be supported on those. And so those should all work and be available. I did see yesterday Ubuntu 24 went to LTS, so I guess we'll have to do that one, but that's not going to be 5.1 time frame. But we'll be looking at that soon. The other big thing, just based on what we see in the lookup service and things like that. Most of you are probably still on CentOS 7, or at least a good chunk of you are still on CentOS 7. That goes end of life in June, and that's not a perfSONAR thing. That's a Red Hat thing. So 5.1 will not be available on CentOS 7. So if you want to get 5.1, you need to upgrade to either Rocky or Alma 9 if you want to stay in the Red Hat space, or basically one of the Debian or Ubuntu variants that we support. If you're blocking on like Ubuntu 22 support, hopefully basically everything should be in place that you're unblocked. If you're going to either Rocky or Alma 9, we've supported that for a while, so you should be clear to do that anytime, but no CentOS 7 this time around. So yeah, so those are kind of the highlights. So I want to zoom in to a couple of the specific features. And again, I'm going to do these in a little bit of a weird order compared to what I had them listed on the last slide. So I want to talk about the iPerf3 change, because this is actually a pretty big deal. So if you're not aware, iPerf3 is actually a separate project from perfSONAR and kind of has a life of its own. It's a command line tool for measuring network traffic performance, mainly like throughput between client and server. It's kind of, in my mind, the de facto standard in terms of tools to do that in this space, or at least as far as the open source tools go. It's probably so if you have router or modem at home from your ISP, there's a good chance that they've put iPerf3 on it so they can run tests to you. I think even a couple weeks ago, Elon Musk had a tweet of him running some iPerf3 to test some Starlink connections and things like that. So it's a pretty popular tool. It's also been around for a while. It's actually developed at ESnet by Bruce Ma and Sarah Larson. And so it's a really great tool and kind of been a foundation for perfSONAR forever. So kind of before iPerf3 had multi-threading and kind of the way it's operated for the better part of probably 10 or 15 years now, it was basically just single threaded, meaning it couldn't really make use of the CPU cores like it would need to drive above speeds of that like 30 to 50 gigabits that's shown there. Maybe you could squeeze a little bit more out of it with tuning and the right setup, but it took quite a bit of work to even get in that 30 to 50 gigs range. At least if you were traveling or if your traffic was traveling any distance, right? And so obviously kind of networks are in a space now where they need to go at higher speeds. So part of the reason for that design decision was back kind of when that was made. The idea was to kind of keep it simple and have a nice simple API for interacting with it and things like that. But I think as the technology has evolved, it became clear that the multi-threading was important to get higher speeds. And we've long had to have these caveats when people have asked about testing 100 gig and things like that, about what tools to use and how to do it, and that just kind of all goes out the window. Now it just kind of works. So iPerf3 has actually had a parallel option for a while, but which means it would start multiple TCP streams, but they'd still just be in a single thread. So really, there was not much benefit there. So to get the multi-threading to work, it actually still uses that same parallel option, that dash parallel. It just will now spawn some threads instead of the old behavior. So pretty easy to take advantage of just by updating the option. And likewise, that means in pscheduler, you just use the existing parallel option if you want to take advantage of this option. So just to give a couple numbers to show the improvement that you get. There was some testing done with a couple back-to-back computers with a 200 gigabit link between them. You can see the specs there. So basically, you can see comparing iPerf3, the multi-threaded version, that's the iPerf3 MT, to the original iPerf3 on that 200 gig connection. The x-axis here is the number of threads, so you kind of see the increase in performance. The y-axis here is the units are a little weird, so it's basically this 1.6 actually means 160 gigabits per second. So basically it was able to get that, and that was with minimal tuning as well, I should know, on these boxes. Comparing it to iPerf2, so iPerf2 is basically iPerf3 was forked from iPerf2 because at the time it wasn't being maintained. Since then, iPerf2 is also has gotten a maintainer, so that there's still some development there. But you can see that iPerf3 and iPerf2, both of which use multi-threading, really what this is intended to show is it's comparable performance. I know in this, the iPerf3 is a little bit higher than iPerf2 here, but I think really the takeaway here is that they're now comparable, right? So you have less of a decision to make or have to worry about when you're trying to test those higher speeds. So yeah, so we're really excited about that. So that's the iPerf 3 aspect. And I know a lot of people have been waiting on that. The other thing that we've updated is the UI, as I mentioned. So just for some context, I want to show the current UI that's in 5.0, right? So not what's coming in 5.1. So this is a screenshot. If you install the toolkit, this is kind of the welcome page you get when you open it up in a browser. So we've had this page for quite a while. You can tell it's very focused on the host itself and like what's running on, like in terms of like processes that are running on the host and things like that. Less focused on like the tests and the test results, which is fine. I mean, this has served us okay for a while, but you know, we kind of felt there could be some improvements here. And you can click through and get some line graphs and things like that. You know, stuff that we've had for a while. The other big unit interface that other people or that a lot of people use is Mad Dash, or what we call Mad Dash. So that's these basically, if you've ever seen one of these pages with these grids like this, basically the rows and columns are different perfSONAR hosts, and then you know the intersection, the boxes essentially represent a test running between those hosts. So generally speaking, you know, you set thresholds. Green means things are performing well. Yellow means they're a little iffy. Red means, yeah, they're not, they're pretty bad. And then there's an orange color that means where I'm not getting any test results, and I think I should. So this has been a super popular visualization for a long time. We don't necessarily want to lose this with any UI changes that we make. But the interface itself, again, is kind of getting a little bit long in the tooth. Has some really old JavaScript, uses iframes places, things security people don't like. So we've been looking at ways to replace that. And so kind of where we've landed for both of these, and what I mentioned earlier is something called Grafana. I think most of you probably know what Grafana is. It's relatively popular, particularly in our community. I know when I go and watch presentations, if there's graphs in those presentations, there's a very high probability these days that it's something taken out of Grafana. So Grafana is an open source visualization platform. There's also a company behind Grafana too that has enterprise versions and things like that, but they've kept everything or kept the core of it open source. The key features of it is it's multi-data source, so it can talk to a lot of different databases and backends and things like that to pull in the data. And then it also has a nice plugin architecture for visualizations as well. So it comes with lots of nice visualizations, graphs and single stats and different diagrams and things like that that are super useful. But then you can also extend it and write your own. And so far, actually, we've had really good luck interacting with their developers and getting like plugins officially accepted and things like that. And so we've actually kind of members of the perfSONAR team at ESnet, and there's some overlap with the NetSage project. Over the past few years, have actually developed some custom plugins that if you go to like the main Grafana plugins page, you'll see these because they've been accepted. And I won't go through all of these here. There's some pretty interesting ones, but for our purposes, this one down here in the middle that looks like the Mad Dash grid was kind of the key for us to be able to make this transition to Grafana, because like I said, we don't want to lose that visualization. So that's called a matrix panel. That's one that got developed, that we developed at ESnet, and then is now kind of available for anybody to use, and we're leveraged pretty heavily in the new 5.1 setup. So that's probably enough talking to the slides. Let's actually jump into some demos here. So I did start setup. So this is the screen. So this is the script I ran earlier. It finished a few minutes ago. So I talked long enough. Even though it's done, I'm actually not going to show this one first. I want to show you actually a couple examples of the UI that have some data in it, and then I'll come back to this and kind of show you how we populate some of that information. So to do that, I'm just going to switch my browser tab here to this UI here. So this is a different setup I have. It's just a VM in the Google Cloud. So it's just doing some private testing and things like that, really kind of for demo purposes. So basically, all this is, I basically ran the equivalent of that script that I showed earlier to install the perfSONAR toolkit. I just came to its IP address like this, like you would with the toolkit. And it kind of directs me to that page, the page that I had on the screen. Let's reload here. And so instead of that page that I showed earlier that you get today, this here, I can make that bigger too. This shows kind of the tests and a little bit more test centric than kind of focusing on like those processes that are running and things like that, which I'll show you in a second. You can still get at that information. So I think there's some interesting stuff kind of right out of the gate. You get a little bit of a summary of just overall out of all the tests, what the max throughput, max packet loss, max jitter is, things like that. You can see I have a test that has 100% packet loss, so I can actually see that here in this table that has the results. That's actually a firewall issue between my hosts. You'll also see some pretty low latencies because these are all just in the same Google data center somewhere. So, not super interesting. This graph right here is actually a list of basically a stat graph of all the tests that are running on the host, basically the number of tests. I think the default interval is 5 minutes. Yeah. So the number of tests of each broken down by type that have run kind of every 5 minutes. So that's kind of useful. Like if, this tank's down really low, you can see I was messing around here a little bit and adding some tests, I think. It spikes up a little bit. So that's, you want it to be relatively flat, but you can be interesting if it's not, just to kind of give you an idea of what's running on the host and how things are doing. Similar to the old interface, if I go back down to this table here, if I were to kind of click through to one of these, I'll get a page with some pretty standard graphs. So there's kind of a shared cursor here between them. So you'll see I have a throughput. My retransmits are non-existent, so that's good. Latency, I would have graphs with the reverse data as well, but the way this host is set up, it's actually part of a central mesh. It's actually just running the forward test is basically what that works out to. So if I was running the reverse, those would show up. You get your packet loss like you'd expect. We've added some new jitter graphs too, as well, with just some different ways to calculate jitter, because when people say jitter, they can mean different things. So you get the breakdowns here, which is super nice. And kind of going down, we have some traceroute data as well. Oh, no, this would be ping, but I don't have any ping tests running. Get some traceroute as well. Again, this particular set is pretty boring because they're all in the same data center, but I'll show you the number of hops and kind of the list of unique trace routes. I think one thing that'll be fun to play with, we've played with a little bit, but don't have anything on the default page yet, is there are a lot of different ways to visualize the trace routes too. There's things like arc diagrams and other things that have some interesting possibilities for doing displays. And I know that's one of the favorite things in the community to play with is different ways to show a trace route. So that's the graphs. I'm going to go back to that home page because there were some more interesting things that I kind of glossed over. So I focused on this middle section here. But if we go on this side column, you'll see some stuff. So we get a breakdown of how many of each type of test is being run. And then down here, we get these buttons. So we'll see host info and my dashboards. I'm first going to click on the host info. So I mentioned when I kind of gave the overview of what's new, some additional instrumentation that we've added to the perfSONAR host. So that's really where where that information kind of comes on full display. So basically, we've added a node exporter, which is, again, kind of an off-the-shelf thing, part of Prometheus to the nodes. We don't actually put Prometheus on here. We just collect it and dump it in the local OpenSearch instance that's already on the box. You can also centrally collect it with our central archive setup. We have a cookbook that covers some of that. But anyways, we get some interesting information here. So on the old toolkit page, you got a list kind of more like what's over here on the right-hand side, where it just told you up or down if a service was currently running. You also get this nice display that actually shows you over time how if the services have been up or down. So I'm only looking at the last 24 hours right now. So things have been running well, but I go back, I think just 2 days even. Yeah, okay, so you'll see there's some red here. So my LS registration daemon was down. So the reason for that was, again, this is a GCP VM. It has an internal address, and by default, the else registration daemon won't run if you just have an internal address. So you've got to either adjust some IP settings or flip a bit that says it's okay. I did that, then it's been happy and green. You can see when I did that. This here is actually a little bit more interesting. And like I said, it's already kind of bearing some fruit in terms of helping us debug. So this particular host, the way it was installed is it was originally a 5.0 host, and then we upgraded it to 5.1. And so that created an interesting update path that working with, I think probably credit goes to Raul Lopez at JISC. He was noticing that his psconfig pscheduler agent was looking a lot like this, where basically at the top of the hour, it basically was crashing, right? And I think we can actually even zoom in here a little bit. So you can really see, and it's not just like around the top of the hour, it's like exactly at the top of the hour, right? Which is a little suspicious. And it actually runs fine in between. So it turns out what was happening was, and when you take the upgrade path, there's an old service that was in the 5.0 that called the service watcher that we've taken out of 5.1 because basically all that functionality we've moved into something called systemd. But basically the point is we don't need it anymore. But it wasn't getting completely uninstalled when you upgrade to 5.1, and it had a cron job that was essentially just taking out psconfig pscheduler agent. And as you can guess, that cron job ran every hour at the top of the hour and was taking it out. So you can see that pretty clearly, right? Whereas in the old interface, he just had the current status, and odds are, because I mean, it was probably down for a few seconds. Unless you were really lucky when you loaded that page, it was going to look like everything was fine, but you actually had it crashing on pretty regular intervals, which isn't great. So that has been interesting to have that type of data just relatively available. And I guess I switched back to the last 24 hours, but this one here too also can check the status of if it's registered in the LS. So similar idea. I think I guess I can go back. So you'll see it was red up until the point, and again, there's a shared cursor to the point that the LS registration daemon got fixed, and then it goes green. So again, it's just kind of helpful status there. Then as we scroll down, you'll see kind of your more standard host metrics, CPU and memory and network traffic, the amount of free disk, all kind of standard host metrics. We're also pulling in some stats. We've got kind of a custom. It's in kind of Prometheus exporter format. But we collect some stats now over time about some of the perfSONAR components. So this is stats that we've been able to actually get out of pscheduler for quite a while. We're just doing a better job displaying them. So we can see basically in terms of all the jobs it's trying to run, in terms of the different tests, what's finished, what's pending, what's due, what failed, things like that. We can see kind of if it's writing, the results to OpenSearch constantly. We can see if there's a big backlog. I actually haven't had a chance. I noticed this morning. I'm not sure why overnight it had that issue, but that's probably worth poking at. But you can see some interesting information there and just some other stuff. Likewise with psconfig, you can make sure it's still running. So you see when it's last run. This particular value is useful if you're parsing the logs, if something is weird. You can also see what meshes it's looking at. So this is just an internal one I set up, and kind of the last time I pulled it down, and if the configure archives option is set and things like that. Get some clock settings from the host, and also all this comes from Node Exporter still. Get a bunch of info about the host tuning settings. So again, actually all of this has been available via like JSON APIs and things. I think maybe we added a few more here for a number of years, but it was kind of hidden away. We didn't have it displayed anywhere. So bringing a lot of that more to the forefront, just to help better understand what's going on with the host and how a host is behaving. So again, pretty excited about all of that. Then kind of, let's see, the last bits I want to show here. So there's another button here for my dashboards. Not super exciting in terms of what to show currently. It just takes you to an empty folder where you can create your own dashboards that use the perfSONAR data or pull in other data. So just kind of a built-in space for that to happen. I'll talk about it more later, but we've got maybe some interesting workshops coming up with more info about how to build your own dashboards. And I think it's one of the exciting features about being able to do all this with Grafana. The last thing I want to show, which I also think is pretty neat, and will maybe make more sense once I kind of go through our fresh host, is so this is a toolkit host, meaning its job is to run measurements, and it has this display. But I basically have it part of a mesh that's also kind of centrally archiving the results to a central archive. And so, before we had Mad Dash, and Mad Dash was always kind of the separate thing, right? And you'd set that up to look at the kind of the central archive or whatever, and kind of look at the full picture of all the hosts that we're testing to each other. You can still totally do that. Again, we have a cookbook that tells you how to do that. But if you want an individual toolkit to do the same thing, you can actually do that quite easily as well. You basically can just, when you run that ps-config remote add command, it'll also hit the little Grafana agent that'll create these dashboards. And so we can actually basically treat this like it's a Mad Dash host, right? So part of the reason we can do this is because this is a lot simpler setup. So Mad Dash is kind of a heavyweight process because it's like constantly pulling all the hosts and like writing them, pulling that information in and rebuilding the displays and things like that. With Grafana, we're just doing live queries basically because the backend is able to handle this stuff much better. And so you'll see here's my throughput dashboard, and these are a bunch of different hosts in GCP. I have a bunch of firewall issues, hence the blank spaces with the throughput tests. By default, it's looking at the last 24 hours. So you can see in the last day, it's like, okay, here's my 100% packet loss host we've seen a couple times. Everybody else is looking pretty good. Again, that's a firewall issue. My trace route test, Google likes to do. This is basically if the hop count changes is what it's alarming on. So, in the Google data center, it likes to do whatever it's going to do with trace route. So it's a little all over the map. But if I want to like zoom in and say, okay, well, what happened in like the last 30 minutes or whatever, I can see that, it's a pretty similar setup. I've actually got no results for some reason for that, and change things around. But yeah, I mean, you can see how kind of snappy it is and easy it is to just kind of jump around to different time ranges, which you could not do at all in the old Mad Dash. So it's super helpful. And then of course you still have the ability, if you want to zoom into any of these, you just can click the box and it'll take you to that same kind of graphs page that I showed earlier, and you can see all those results. And so that that's kind of another cool feature you get with the UI. So that's probably enough walking through the UI. I want to show you just a couple other quick things before then I kind of wrap up, just using our new host we set up. So I'm going to bring this CLI back here. So this is our kind of new fresh host that we set up. And I think if I go here, we should, self-signed certificate. So click through that. We should get a Grafana page that will look pretty empty. Yep. So I'm just going to the IP essentially of that VM. All right. So yeah, we get this Grafana page that's pretty empty because we don't have any data because we haven't set up any tests. So that's kind of what we'd expect. So one of the first things I like to do when I set up a new host is, obviously double check everything is working. So I mentioned we've got some nice tools that we've added for basically just quickly kind of checking the health of various parts of perfSONAR. So one that's been around for a while that we've added a couple things to is the pscheduler troubleshoot command. I'm just going to run that really quickly. So it's just checking a few things. It's done a lot of this for a while, just the MTU, making sure it can actually hit all the APIs and things like that. Checking the clock, hitting some more of the APIs. Looking at the last runs. Obviously, we haven't run any tests before, so that's never happened, but that's to be expected, and does a basic test. Again, if you've run perfSONAR before, there's a chance you've run that tool. We also have one now that this is new for the archive, which I think will be a welcome addition because I know a lot of people have run into issues with the archive and it's hard to tell what's going on. So I'm just going to run it without any command line options to start off with. So I'm going to run ps archive troubleshoot. And so what this is going to do is check a bunch of things related to the archive. So you'll see everything's good up to a point. So OpenSearch is okay, Logstash is okay, the various APIs, and they're behind some proxies, those are okay. Trucks credentials, so can Logstash talk to OpenSearch? And if you don't know what these components are, that's totally okay. But all that's good. And then the last thing it checks for is there actually data in OpenSearch, right? So again, we haven't set up any tests, so we would expect that to fail. And so basically, there's a message here that tries to essentially describe that there's no data in the database, that this might be expected if this is a new archive, which it is, and you have not set up measurements. And so it kind of runs through that. And then if you have set up measurements, it runs through some kind of next steps to try to see if you can figure out, to help you figure out what's going on were that the case. There is some command line options in our documentation, like in some of the cookbooks and things. You can add like the skip OpenSearch data if you don't want to get that fail. So I'll do that real quick, right? And so then we don't get that last fail because we know that we're not supposed to have any data. So then one kind of last quick thing I wanted to walk through just to maybe highlight a little bit more clearly how basically on the page that we were looking at that had data, we had these dashboards showing up here. I wanted to kind of just walk through the process. What I was going to do is add this new host to a mesh. And I'm realizing I didn't open my command line for that. So let me do that really quick. This is the archive. So I'm just going to log into a central archive I have that's set up really quick here. And just basically publish a version of the test mesh that has the new host. And apologies, I meant to log into this before because this always takes just a second. All right, so we're in our central archive here. And I'm gonna go to my psconfig template. So if you're not familiar, this is what psconfig template looks like. I've actually already added the host. It's this demo host, so we don't need to edit the JSON here. But I have not published it yet, so I'm going to run the psconfig publish command, which again, this is using the rewritten psconfig. But if you used this command before, it works just like it always has. So we'll do that. Okay, so that's published now, and it tells me to run this command on my host where I want the test to be run. So basically on my new host, I'm just going to copy and paste that, and we'll run it. And you'll see there's two things. It added it to the pscheduler agent, which is kind of normal. You probably are all used to that. So that means it'll tell pscheduler there's a set of tests I want you to run that are defined in this JSON file. It also updates something called the Grafana agent, kind of similar to the old psconfig mad dash agent, if you're familiar with that. But instead of talking to mad dash, it will now talk to Grafana. So since the toolkit has both of those by default, it just adds them to both. There are command line options if you want to add it to one and not the other, etc. You can use those. So basically now that'll should create that sidebar for us that shows the full list of dashboards. And see if I blabbed long enough. It doesn't take very long. Should have picked it up about a minute. It probably won't be results yet, but yeah, okay. You'll see this already ran. So now this is filled in, and we can at least look at the dashboards. In this 226, I should have structured this better so the name showed up. 226 is our demo host, so obviously there's no tests there. You can adjust the colors too, so those show up as orange, but there's no test there, so that's blacked out. So once we start getting tests, that'll all be good. But that's basically the process for kind of setting it up and getting into mesh in a quick view. So let's see, I can maybe just check real quick to see if we lucked out and there's any let me see something else is being weird. All right, we'll see if there's any Okay, no results yet, but that's okay. And the second latency results should hopefully show up, and this will get filled in. But that's basically the end of my demo. So hopefully that was somewhat insightful. And hopefully if you have it already, you'll get a chance to play around with it as well with the beta. So let's go back to the presentation here. There was just a few more things I wanted to highlight before we wrapped up, and I'll take some questions. I'll share these slides. There are a bunch of slides with screenshots and different things that I talked about. So you'll have access to those as well. So let's jump into a few last bits. So I talked a lot about like the features and things like that. Some of the kind of nuances though, if you already have a perfSONAR host, what to kind of expect on update. So this update should be a little bit more straightforward than 5.0. Since it's not as large of a backend change, at least that's the hope. It's mostly all front end stuff. So if you're running a perfSONAR toolkit, as soon as the update runs, either via auto update or if you run DNF update or apt update, you'll automatically get that new Grafana UI that I showed. You don't have to do anything other than run that update command. Everything should go in place for you. If you're running a mad dash instance, so separate mad dash instance, that won't be touched. We won't mess with that. Basically, when you're ready to migrate, there's a Grafana cookbook here for basically how to set all that up. So we just want to we try not to automatically touch the central stuff if auto updates are on, just because there's a lot of things talking to it, and we just like to give people a little bit more control over that since there can be a few more moving parts to worry about. But yeah, basically there's a cookbook that's it's in the release notes. It's kind of, we publish some links and things like that that talk about how to set that up. And then just emphasize one more time. I guess I didn't talk about Debian 10 and Ubuntu 18 as much, but if you're on Debian 10, Ubuntu 18, or CentOS 7, if you want 5.1, you got to move to a newer operating system. All of those are basically approaching end of life, I believe, this summer. So those won't be included in part of 5.1. So, and probably your sysadmins, if you have those OSs out there, are probably also already bugging you to get on a newer OS. So so that's basically what you can expect in terms of some of the details on the update. And then I just really quickly wanted to touch on, and I'm happy to take more questions on this, or even at the office hours next week if anybody wants to have deeper discussions on some of these. So we've got 5.1, it's in beta now. I'm kind of hoping early summer, assuming things go well. I know I'm personally kind of hoping June timeframe, but we'll see on doing the actual official release of 5.1. So that's when it would go into production. And then kind of starting to look beyond that. Okay, we've got this, we've redone the back end in 5.0, we've redone a good chunk of the front end in 5.1. What's the next part that we want to, or what will we kind of be looking at next? So I think one of the last bits in terms of the UI and kind of this set of changes we've been doing in 5.x to replace some of the old crufty parts is the test configuration UIs. So in 5.1, that's all exactly as it's always been. But I showed that JSON file briefly before I ran that psconfig publish command. That's still kind of a painful experience to build those, and kind of is probably being nice. We do have a couple web interfaces that help with that, but they also have their own unique challenges, I guess I'll say. So that's where the next focus is going to be, is cleaning that up and making that a really good experience, because I think that's some of the worst parts of the various cookbooks we have and things like that, is having to build that file. So we want to look to make that better. We're also looking at some enhancements to the lookup service data model. So the lookup service, if you're not familiar, is perfSONAR hosts can register their existence. That way other people can find them. We use that to collect a lot of our deployment stats and things like that. Looking at it, just cleaning up that data model a little bit so we can do some more interesting stuff with it. And then there's some exploratory work we want to do in terms of better supporting PTP in the various tools and things like that. So those will kind of all be some areas of focus beyond 5.1. There's also some really good upcoming events. So one we've mentioned already, next week, same time, same place as this one. We're having perfSONAR office hours. I know I will be there. I need to touch base with the other developers to see if anybody else is going to be on with me. But that's time where you can come grill us about either questions you have about perfSONAR in general, issues you're having with your deployment, questions about future directions of perfSONAR, basically whatever. We're just kind of make ourselves available to everyone to come chat. This will be the second time we've done it. First one went really well. Had a lot of really good discussion. So looking forward to that follow-up. And then a few weeks after that, I guess a little over a week after that, is the perfSONAR user workshop in Europe. It's in Trondheim, Norway. If you can't book your trip in time to get there, there is going to be remote participation. There's a pretty good agenda at the link there. If you are in person, there's also a workshop that's going to walk through kind of setting up 5.1 and a bunch of different things, which I think should be pretty interesting. And then a month after that, at the TNC conference, which will be in France, that JAN's hosting, there's going to be a perfSONAR Grafana workshop on the last day of that. I'll actually be hosting that workshop. The focus on that will not be as much on installing perfSONAR. It's going to be more on actually, once you have an installation, kind of building custom Grafana dashboards and doing kind of interesting stuff with the data. So I'm actually pretty excited about that. If you can't make it to TNC, we probably will be running that workshop at some other conferences coming up. We're basically trying to sort out all that scheduling out. But for the next couple months, these are some interesting things to check out if you want to learn more about any of these topics. And then I will wrap up. This is my last slide. The perfSONAR community survey. We sent that out, I believe, last week. So I encourage everyone who's here to fill that out. It's really helpful. We've actually already had a pretty good response, but we'll probably keep that open probably at least through some of the workshops and things that are coming up. So, I'll say a month or so longer. So, please take the opportunity to fill that out. I think, perfSONAR is at a pretty interesting point. We've kind of ripped out a lot of the old parts. We're getting close to probably having a lot of those replaced. So I think we're in a really good spot to start tackling some new things and really want to hear what you guys are interested in, what your experiences have been as we've ripped out a lot of these big components and things like that. So this is a chance to kind of let us know what you're thinking. So yeah, please, if you can, fill that out. And I will leave this up on the screen so people can grab that link while we talk. And with that, I'll open the floor to questions.
All right, thank you so much, Andy. Everybody could unmute themselves now if they wish, or raise their hands, or ask questions in the chat room. Mark has been doing a good job of already chasing down a couple in the chat room. Phil's first question here, which I will read out, is the 5.1 toolkit literally a combination of test point and archive? If not, how different is it from the individual tools?
It is literally a combination of perfSONAR test point, perfSONAR archive, and perfSONAR Grafana. So, I mean, that is intentional. I didn't bore people with that diagram. But we actually, there's a much cleaner package structure now in 5.1 for how a lot of this stuff ties together. That's also kind of a feature of this. So yeah, all that stuff kind of fits together a little bit more cleanly than it used to. So test point, basically, for those who don't know, gives you like pscheduler and ps config, so command line side of things. Archive gives you OpenSearch and Logstash, so the ability to store it. And then there's this new Grafana package. It gives you all the UI stuff that I was showing. So that's what all that is.
Okay. And Asif, you have your hand raised if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for a detailed presentation. So I have a few questions. First is that maybe I missed that one you already explained. So we have currently on our sites, we are running 5.0, right? So we require the clean installation for these current systems, or do we need to upgrade upgradation is possible?
So you can, so if you're running CentOS 7, you'll have to do a clean installation. That's not a perfSONAR thing. That's just a CentOS thing. If you're already on like Rocky or Alma 9 or one of the Ubuntu or Debian variants that we support, it's just an update. You don't have to do a clean install. So it'll just be a DNF update or an apt-get update, and you'll be all set.
Okay. And the other one is that do we have this 5.1's any Docker image
Yes. Yeah, I didn't mention that. I probably should have. So there is a Docker image. There's one for the beta as well. I think Phil has a email on the list. He wasn't finding the staging tag. I don't think we have a staging tag there, but there's a 5.1 tag. It's set up very similar. So it's basically a perfSONAR test point Docker image still. There is a difference. So it should be relatively transparent. The old one was based off of CentOS 7, so the image basically was a CentOS 7 image. The new one will be based off of Ubuntu, or is based off of Ubuntu 22. But yes, that Docker image is still available.
Only the test point or entire 5.
Only the test point right now. We don't do a full toolkit. We've talked about it. We might in the future. I mean, we're already kind of pushing some of the philosophical limits, I guess you could call them, of what Docker wants you to do in terms of putting a bunch of different components in one container. We might just pull the trigger and do it at some point, but right now it's just the test point.
Okay, thank you. And the last one is that if we are, moving towards the 5.1, then which central archiver we should have to use and which psconfig files for our servers?
I mean, I think that's dependent on the site. So the central archive is something you would set up. So if you already have one, basically just, sticking to that, then that really shouldn't be any different. If you're part of a community like the WLCG or anything like that, I mean, you'll have to talk to the community members there. In terms of the psconfig file, again, none of that's.
We are using the community. I think whatever we have in the main dash, we have the WLCG community central archiver that we are using. I think Sean is maintaining that one. So for one, we need to maintain that one, or we can create our own as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, so you can keep that one. You can create your own. And I mean that's actually even true now. You can create your own. So there really shouldn't be any change there.
Okay.
I know from talking with like Sean and Marion Babick and others who maintain that, like they'll be migrating, like they have some Mad Dash instances where maybe you go to look at those results, they'll be migrating that to the Grafana stuff. So,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
Anything else?
Saw somebody unmuting. Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah. So if this Grafana is going to be the default for viewing in 5.1, and you were to say start a central archive in the current system in 5.0, is there a data migration that has to happen when you do that update?
There's not, nope. So since 5.0 is OpenSearch, everything's still based on OpenSearch, so there's no data migration.
Okay.
So you should be good to start that now if you'd like.
Hi, Andy. I'm from Caltech. So we use PWA to add hosts and test scripts. So do we still use that for 5.1, or do we have to use template?
Nope. So you can still continue to use PWA for 5.1. So basically that'll spit out the psconfig JSON. None of that has changed. So all of that should continue to work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right, well, thank you again, Andy, for going through all that. Send me a copy of those slides. I'll make sure that they get posted along with the video. And like Andy said, and I said at the top, it'll be perfSONAR office hours next week. We'll send around a reminder just for people who are interested in attending. And we will talk to everybody soon. Have a good weekend.
Excuse me, do you have a Zoom link for that office hours meeting?
It'll be the same Zoom link as this one.
Ah, perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.